A black couple is forcibly removed from a high-end business by a security officer. However, only 10 minutes later, he encounters a surprising turn of events that caught everyone by surprise. To find out what led to his horrific demise, stay tuned for the stunning twist that will make you rethink everything. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching today. If you enjoy stories with unexpected turns, subscribe to our channel so you won't miss an episode. The high-end department store was bustling with activity as shoppers perused the aisles of expensive goods. Alicia and Marcus Carter were among them. They were a married pair who had an aura of calm assurance. Alicia, clad in a sleek blazer and heels, stood poised, admiring a leather purse at her side. Marcus, with a casual grin that tempered the sharpness of his cut suit, straightened his cufflinks, whispered to one another, chuckling every now and then as they made their way from one display to another. Neil Harris, the newest member of the store's security detail, stood crossed-armed by the entrance, surveying the room, critical eye style, as he took note of the shoppers and their every move. Alicia grabbed for a price tag, and he scowled. Something about Marcus and Alicia bothered him, but he couldn't put his finger on it. He felt uneasy with them, as if they were the kind of people who normally shopped at upscale boutiques. Alicia maintained her calm and raised an eyebrow as Neil approached them with a quick gait, his voice loud enough to turn heads. "Excuse me," he said forcefully, and Marcus glanced up in shock. Neil kept talking, but his words were less. Marcus nodded in agreement, moving closer to his wife while Neil's gaze darkened. "No, thank you. We're just browsing," Alicia said with a grin and a calm voice. Holding Neil's gaze, Alicia continued, "We are customers." Marcus's normally placid grin faded as Alicia's eyes tightened slightly, but she maintained her composure and calm voice. "If you're not planning to make a purchase, I'll have to ask you to leave for a moment." "It would be best if you left before things got out of hand," Neil grinned, and Alicia glanced around to see that other shoppers were now openly gazing at her, with some even seeming inquisitive. Marcus held her shoulder while others talked behind him. "We're not causing any problems," he stated firmly, his deep voice calm. "We're just shopping like everyone else." Neil stepped closer and shook his head. "I'm not going to repeat myself. Leave now, or I'll summon reinforcements." The atmosphere in the room became increasingly tense as more and more people's gazes shifted toward them. Alicia clutched her purse more tightly, about to speak, but Marcus gave her a shoulder rub, telling her to stop. Without saying a word more, they both made their way to the exit, their heads held low. As they departed, Neil stood upright, his mood lifted. He fixed his badge and cast a peek at a co-worker who averted his gaze. "You've got to keep control," he said to himself, his voice barely audible above the others. Sitting in quiet with the engine idling, Marcus rhythmically tapped his fingers on the steering wheel, his normally pleasant demeanor betraying his lack of awareness that he had already put in motion something far greater, something that would rock the very ground on which he stood outside the shop. Marcus let out a frustrated sigh, while Alicia sat calmly at his side, her hands on her lap. Her stance was unfaltering, but her quiet spoke a great deal. Alicia was not the kind to let such occurrences pass without a fight. Marcus questioned, his voice hinting at reluctance. "Shouldn't we just let this go? This isn't the first time anything like this has happened." Alicia faced him, her gaze intense, and she repeated, "Let it go," in a tone that was both calm and laced with astonishment. "In front of everyone, we were treated like criminals, even though we hadn't done anything wrong." Marcus tried to soften his voice, but Alicia stated that people like him don't listen. Alicia then took out her phone and started texting, maybe not for us, but at least for someone else. Her words were deliberate, but she was rushing to get a message out. Marcus watched as she typed, and he asked, "Who are you texting?" even though he suspected Caroline. Alicia responded without looking up at Caroline. If anybody could explain what had just transpired, it was Hastings, who was both a personal friend and the regional director of the department store chain. "You're really doing this," Marcus said, his head slightly cocked and his lips curving into a faint grin. Alicia's phone buzzed almost immediately with a message, causing her to peek at the screen and grin slightly. Caroline said that she wants to see us tonight at the flagship shop, and Marcus arched an eyebrow in response. Caroline was already in the middle of a discussion with the other driver as they moved out of the parking lot. "Neither do I," she responded, her voice firm. As Neil leaned against the security desk near the entrance, idly scrolling through his phone, he occasionally glanced up to scan the crowd with what he thought was a trained eye. His co-worker Lisa approached him, and he had no idea that his actions were about to backfire in ways he could never have imagined. With a mischievous grin, Neil tucked his phone into his pocket. "Come on, Lisa, you saw them. They didn't belong," he said, his voice low and accusatory. The pair in question hadn't done anything wrong. It's not about how they looked. It's about maintaining the ambiance in here. Professional people pay for exclusivity. Neil rolled his eyes, and Lisa scowled in discomfort. They were simply shopping like everyone else. Lisa shook her head, plainly distressed, and added, "I don't know, Neil." It didn't feel right. Neil's tone became defensive, but Lisa didn't need a lecture to answer. The shop was okay with her. Robert, the manager, entered the room with a severe expression on his face. He quickly glanced over Neil and Lisa before saying, "Neil, just say one word in my office." Robert's rapid speech left little space for debate, so Neil stood up straight and brushed aside Lisa's concerned expression. He inquired in an attempt to seem casual as he trailed after Robert to the back room. As they entered, Robert crossed his arms and leaned against the desk, signaling a serious situation. Neil wrinkled his brow, bewildered, and questioned, "What are you talking about?" Robert inhaled deeply. "A customer complaint had just come in about the pair you had accompanied." Neil shrugged, his confidence unshaken. He had no clue. All he knew was that there were some unwelcome visitors. Robert's jaw clenched. "Someone I believe Caroline Hastings, is involved with corporate check." Robert, the regional director, screamed at her, "And she's on her way here." Neil couldn't identify the name, but it sounded a ring. Robert Burr gazed at Neil for a long while, before shaking his head in disapproval. At that moment, Sheck was absolutely not pleased with Neil, and the atmosphere in the room seemed to become heavier. Neil opened his mouth to react, but he couldn't bring himself to speak. It was the first time that night that he felt the weight of his actions settling on him. As Neil's confidence began to erode, he swallowed hard and heard footsteps reverberating down the hallway. Suddenly, the door swung open and Caroline Hastings stepped inside, her expression betraying her true feelings. Caroline appeared commanding as she strode into the office, commanding everyone's attention. Her calm demeanor and sharp navy blazer belied the frustration that must have been building up beneath her surface. With a quick glance at Robert, she then locked eyes with Neil, who was visibly uncomfortable in his chair. Asked, with a steady but confident tone, "Yes, ma'am?" Neil responded with a much more unsure tone, straightening his posture in an effort to seem professional, but the perspiration betrayed him. Caroline, speaking on her tablet, placed it on the desk and tapped the screen. Neil cleared his throat to gain some time to collect his thoughts before continuing. "I was just doing my job, ma'am. The couple seemed out of place. They were acting. I need to hear your side of the story about the incident with the couple you removed from the shop tonight." Curiously, I didn't want to cause any trouble in the shop, so Caroline arched an eyebrow. Her countenance was calm, but her tone became somewhat sharper as she asked, "How exactly were they out of place?" Neil stumbled over his words, but he explained Caroline felt their lips pressing into a thin line, and it seemed like they were lingering for too long. So, to clarify, you chose to remove 2 paying clients without Caroline's eyes widened in surprise as she asked, "Have you ever considered the possibility that you might be judging them based on more than just their behavior?" Neil nodded, his self-assurance dwindling with each passing moment. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "I was simply attempting to maintain the store's atmosphere." Neil's expression hardened as he averted his gaze from Caroline's intense look. "No, ma'am," he said. "I don't judge people like that." Caroline groaned and swiped through her tablet screen, but luckily the facts contradicted her. She then turned the device toward Neil. The security film clearly shows Alicia and Marcus casually perusing the aisles, pointing out various goods to one another. The only disturbance occurs when Neil approaches them, his body language coming off as forceful. Robert awkwardly moves to stand behind Caroline, saying, "Neil, this doesn't look good." Carrie continued, her voice slicing through the tension. "It's not just about this one incident. We've received other complaints, subtle ones about how you've behaved, with specific customers. Tonight's event, however, was not subtle. It was obvious." Neil glanced from Caroline to Robert, who he knew he couldn't dispute since the proof was too strong. Caroline stood up straight and returned her tablet to the desk, saying, "I want to make one thing clear." Neil felt his heart sink as she made it clear that the business would not accept any kind of discrimination. He had failed to respect their ideals, and now he would have to face the repercussions of his actions. Unfortunately, he had miscalculated the seriousness of the situation. With an immutable tone that left no space for debate, Caroline delivered the words that would ultimately determine his fate. "You're dismissed from your position, effective immediately. Clean out your locker and leave the premises. Security will escort you, if necessary." The room fell into a dead silence as Neil stood there, his pride momentarily paralyzed. When his self-assurance crumbled, he stuttered, "But, Ma'am, there's nothing else to talk about." Caroline cut him off abruptly, telling him his behavior was unacceptable and that he was no longer welcome. As Neil limped out of the office, his head hung low, Caroline looked to Robert, who was visibly shaken. "Completed. But this isn't just about one worker. We have to deal with the underlying problems that made this possible." Robert agreed, but he seemed anxious. Caroline's remarks lingered like a problem that would need more than a band-aid solution. As Neil plodded down the corridor, his uniform becoming heavier with each stride. The store's usual hum seemed muffled, drowned out by the constant hammering in his ears. A few of his co-workers sent him curious looks, while others averted their eyes. Neil approached his locker, while Lisa remained close, seeming as if she were occupied with inventory, but in reality she was unable to control her emotions and instead clenched his fists in humiliation and fury. Neil slammed his locker open, sending a mechanical clang reverberating down the hallway. Lisa shivered at the sound. "I know you want to!" he screamed, his voice low but tinged with fury. As he retrieved his possessions from the locker and stuffed them into a duffel bag, Neil sneered and snapped, saying, "I warned you." Her voice was gentle and laced with remorse. "You didn't have to treat them that way. It's the same old story. Rule breakers end up paying the price." Neil briefly let go of the locker door as Lisa crossed her arms in frustration. "But the thing is, they didn't really breach the rules. You simply thought they didn't belong." For a brief second, he pondered her remarks, but the pain of shame overwhelmed any self-reflection. Still, he said something coldly, "Good for them." Lisa sighed, her countenance softening, and Neil thought, "Perhaps this is an opportunity for you to evaluate why this I'm out of here," Neil replied, throwing his duffel bag over his shoulder as he moved away from her, his jaw clenching from the lecture Lisa. "Everything happened, not just the firing." Lisa watched him go with a mix of sadness and disappointment. She had hoped that this would make Neil think, but he clearly wasn't prepared to face the truth. Meanwhile, back at the office, Caroline paced as she discussed next steps with Robert. She was firm that we couldn't simply fire him and assume the problem was resolved. Caroline stopped her pacing and put her hands on the tabletop. We need to go deeper with actual training. There is obviously a culture here that permits this behavior to fester. Robert grudgingly agreed. You're right, but he was unsure of how to begin. I will meet with Alicia and Marcus tonight to make it clear that this is a priority. They deserve to hear directly from me what steps we're taking, not just talk about it in meetings. Robert raised an eyebrow. But I am meeting with them. Yes, Caroline said firmly. Restoring trust is of utmost importance, not just with them, but with any customer who has ever felt uncomfortable in our shops. Caroline's unwavering resolve made it clear that change was on the way, and it wouldn't be cosmetic like what had happened before. Caroline strode into the room with a measured stride, greeting them with a firm but sincere demeanor. What began as a guard's mistake had become the catalyst for something much bigger. Alicia and Marcus sat in a private lounge within the flagship store, their expressions calm but expectant. Carrie sat down across from them and shook their hands. I want to start by saying how deeply sorry I am for what happened tonight. What you experienced was unacceptable. I take full responsibility for ensuring it never happens again. Alicia moved in ever so slightly, her keen eyes scanning Caroline for any hint of insincerity. This isn't the first time we've been treated like this, she remarked calmly. Tonight's events are a symptom of a bigger issue, Marcus agreed, his voice betraying his frustration. He spoke about how exhausting it is to be in space where they have every right to be, but instead they are treated like intruders. Caroline listened carefully, nodding in understanding as they spoke. Marcus arched an eyebrow, asking, So, what are your plans to tackle this issue? Caroline grabbed inside her purse and said, You're absolutely right. This incident is just a symptom of a much bigger problem that needs to be addressed not only at this store, but across the company. She produced a folder and set it on the table. I've already taken swift action. She said the security guard in question had been fired effective immediately. However, I'm well aware that eliminating an individual won't solve systemic issues. Thus, I'm initiating a thorough evaluation of our policies and procedures, beginning with staff training. Introduced an anonymous reporting mechanism to ensure that both employees and customers can securely voice issues without fear of retaliation, and gave them access to a folder outlining our activities. We are also requiring comprehensive bias training for all employees, from frontline workers to executives. After carefully reviewing the documents, Alicia finally spoke up. This is a start. However, she quickly added, training and policies alone won't change attitudes. So, how exactly are you going to make sure this isn't just a formality? Caroline smirked. I knew you'd ask that. She went on to say that their collaborating with Marcus crossed his arms, his skepticism plainly visible. What about the customers who have already been wronged? People like us, who have been made to feel small in your stores. I'm committed to making meaningful changes, but it will take time and the expertise of diversity and inclusion experts. Alicia glanced at Marcus and said, We will hold you to that. Caroline nodded seriously, her expression indicating that she was serious about the topic at hand. Alicia expressed her gratitude for the outreach and her desire to collaborate with Marcus and you to make sure the changes were effective, assertively said that this must not remain abstract, rather it must have tangible results. In response, Caroline rose to her feet and extended her hand again, emphasizing her agreement. I assure you, this is not the conclusion of our discussion, rather it marks the commencement, she promised. After Caroline departed, Alicia and Marcus sat in silence for a while. Marcus inquired, Do you believe she means it? Alicia stroked the folder's edge carefully. She could, she remarked, but ultimately, it's our responsibility to see that she follows through. Caroline hurriedly made her way back to her office, her thoughts consumed by the immense magnitude of the work at hand. It wasn't only about rescuing a brand, it was about establishing a culture that delivered on its promises. With unwavering determination, she was determined to succeed. Neil sat isolated in the dim light of his small apartment. He stared blankly at his phone screen, which displayed a deluge of missed calls and texts from friends and family. The duffel bag he had taken from his locker lay untouched on the floor, and his uniform shirt lay crumpled on the couch. The reality of his termination was finally sinking in. Family members were either curious or worried, but Neil just couldn't bring himself to answer any of their questions. As he thought back on the events of the evening, doubt started to creep in. Had he overstepped? Was it really that bad? To divert himself, he reached for the remote and turned on the TV, but it didn't help. Instead, he saw a news segment about the incident on local television. The headline read, "Luxury Store Faces Backlash After Alleged Discrimination." Neil felt sick to his stomach as he watched the news anchor describe the couple as respected professionals and the store's behavior as a blurry photo of Alicia and Marcus leaving the store appeared on the screen, along with statements from witnesses who called the incident disgraceful. Witnesses' statements made Neil feel ashamed and angry, so he quickly turned off the TV. However, the words disgraceful and unacceptable continued to agitate him. He reclined on the sofa, his gaze fixed on the ceiling, as he tried to reassure himself that his acts weren't that horrible. However, the recollection of Caroline's remarks kept coming back to haunt him. Unflinching admission that his actions had gone too far kept playing in his mind. Unable to control himself, Neil snatched his phone and flipped through social media, where he was shocked to see that the incident was trending. Some users expressed their disgust at the couple's treatment, while others conjectured about broader systemic problems. Neil threw his phone aside, his anger building up, and he wanted to throw away the whole thing by blaming the couple, the business, or anybody else except himself, after hearing a statement that hit him like a ton of bricks. As he sat there, he began to feel a strange sense of guilt. His mind wandered to Lisa's section when she said, "If you keep blaming others, nothing will change." He despised the echo of her voice in his brain, but he couldn't ignore it. It was time to face the truth. Maybe he had been wrong. But now what? With his career in ruins and his reputation ruined, Neil felt completely lost, unsure of how to move forward. It had been years since he had felt this way. Resuming their duties at the store, Caroline called an emergency meeting of her leadership team. The tension was palpable as they took their seats and exchanged anxious looks. The situation involving Neil had rapidly descended into a public relations nightmare, and Caroline was sick of it, cannot afford to deal with it in a feeble manner. She took a position at the head of the table, exuding an air of authoritative command. She started speaking in a steady but firm voice, emphasizing that the events of tonight are unacceptable for reasons beyond the fact that they garnered media attention. Moreover, they contradict our stated principles as an organization. The actions of a single guard, a junior manager, reluctantly raised his hand, asking, "Caroline, firing Neil was the right call, but do you really think this is going to blow over? The media is running with it." In response, Caroline nodded, acknowledging the manager's concern, but she was more concerned with fixing the situation. Something is wrong, and it's systemic. For far too long, we've disregarded the warning signals, dismissed complaints, held ineffective training sessions, and failed to hold anyone accountable. Finally, another manager has spoken up, but her voice is racked with uncertainty. Where do we begin? Caroline took a stand, but the situation remains dire. As Caroline withdrew a stack of documents from her folder, she took a long breath and said, "We begin with honesty and transparency. Tomorrow morning, we release a public statement acknowledging what happened. No excuses, just the truth, and a commitment to change." The audience became quiet as her words sank in. The senior HR manager nodded in agreement as she continued, her voice becoming more gentle but firm. "Next, we involve our employees. This isn't just about policies, it's about culture." To that end, she planned to hold listening sessions where employees at all levels could share their stories. "I've already contacted experts in bias and inclusion training. This won't be a one-time event. Rather, it will be a continuous effort to address her concerns about the present courses, which are obviously inadequate." Caroline responded by saying that we will revamp them entirely. Robert, who had remained silent up until this point, suddenly said, "Now what about the public? How can we persuade consumers that we are serious about this?" Caroline looked at him with a steady stare, and he responded, "By demonstrating that words alone will not suffice, we must take concrete steps to restore their trust. I'm extending an invitation to Alicia and Marcus to work alongside us on these projects. Their insight is priceless, and their eagerness to participate could influence the way ahead." A gasp of surprise echoed through the room, as the idea of directly involving the couple was a fearless action that was in line with Caroline's nonsensical approach. She sensed the discomfort of her teammates, but persisted anyhow. She acknowledged that the endeavor would be challenging and would necessitate investment of time, energy, and resources. However, she warned that the alternative, a failure to. As the conference came to a close, Caroline remained behind, staring out the window at the deserted streets below. The weight of the enormous job ahead of her was heavy, but she felt an increasing resolve that this wasn't only about the next day. The department store's social media accounts posted a statement aimed at rescuing the company's image and establishing a new norm that would prevent prejudice from flourishing behind the pretense of professionalism. This statement, painstakingly written under Caroline's supervision, managed to find a middle ground between responsibility and a commitment to improvement. "We sincerely apologize for the event that happened at our shop last evening. The behavior shown by our former employee does not represent our values, principles we uphold. We're sorry for the hurt this has caused both personally and in the community at large, and we're determined to make a difference so that everyone who enters our doors is treated with dignity and respect. We promise to listen, to learn, and to put what we hear into practice," prompting a variety of reactions, from praise for the store's promptness to skepticism. Remarks went something like, "This is a good start, let's see if they actually do anything," and "Talk is cheap." Alicia perused, as she looked over at Marcus, who was reading an article about the incident on his tablet, as she sipped her coffee at the kitchen counter. "At least they're admitting they messed up," she murmured, her tone measured. Marcus raised an eyebrow, acknowledging that it is one thing doing just as he was ready to begin. Alicia's phone started ringing, and she placed it on speaker. "Good morning, Caroline," she began, her voice calm but somewhat fatigued. I want to express my gratitude for the chance you've given us to discuss this. I understand that you're not supposed to be our leader, but your thoughts and feelings are really helpful." Alicia propped herself up against the counter, her expression thoughtful. "Caroline, I understand that you're trying to make amends, and I admire your effort, but ultimately it's your actions that matter. I would really appreciate your assistance in defining our new efforts. Your opinion is crucial in ensuring that the changes we implement are relevant. Your role will entail consulting on our new training program, PRS, and participating in a panel discussion for workers about the due to the influence of prejudice." Marcus put down his iPad and focused entirely on the phone. "You want us to sit down at your table?" "Yes," Caroline said, "we need help, and I won't lie and say we can do this on our own. Your participation would be really appreciated." Alicia finally spoke out after Alicia and Marcus exchanged looks. "We'll consider it, but only if we see real improvement. This isn't a public relations stunt, Caroline. The story is important not just to us, but to the workers who need to hear it." Marcus sat back in his chair, his face meditative. "What do you think?" Alicia gazed out the window, her brow furrowed. "I understand your hesitancy, but I assure you this isn't about optics. It's about creating something better. It's a lot of responsibility, but I believe that if we don't assist, nothing will change." Marcus agreed, saying, "If we do this, we hold them accountable. No shortcuts." Alicia concurred, smiling slightly, and said, "Let's see what they're really like." Caroline convened a follow-up meeting with her team at the store. The public response had ignited debates among employees, with some standing by Neil's actions and others rallying behind the company's pledge to change. Caroline understood that the next weeks would be pivotal in establishing a precedent for the future of the store. She assured the team, is not about optics or censoring criticism, but rather about establishing a culture in which such incidents do not occur again. "This," she said, "begins with each of us." The ball was rolling, but Caroline knew the real challenge lay ahead, regaining the trust of her co-workers and customers. The news of additional inclusion measures and the fallout from the previous event had produced a combination of intrigue and anxiety among workers and the public as employees poured into the store's break room for a planned meeting. The room hummed with quiet chatter. As Lisa sat silently at a table, arms crossed, surveying the crowd, she made note of a few workers who had been Neil's pals in the past, and some exchanged wary looks with them. Others mumbled about how dull the seminar was going to be, frequently made light-hearted jokes with him while hunkered down in a corner, their expressions betraying their apprehension. Across the room, a younger employee hushed a conversation with a colleague, asking, "Do you think they're going to make us do role-playing exercises again? Last time it was just awkward." The atmosphere became more subdued as Caroline strode confidently into the room, radiating an air of authority. Standing tall at the head of the room with two trainers she had brought in to guide the conversation, she thanked everyone for attending. A screen showed the words, "Moving forward, building a culture of respect." Caroline started by keeping her tone steady but friendly, acknowledging that there had been a lot of tension and uncertainty. "We let down our customers and ourselves last week, and although the behavior of one employee was the direct reason, we must recognize that this event did not occur in a vacuum." She stopped, surveying the room before addressing the matter head-on. A few workers fidgeted uneasily in their chairs, while others nodded in agreement. Lisa leaned forward, her concentration becoming sharper, and Caroline persisted, saying this isn't the only problem. It's not about placing blame or shame. Rather, it's about admitting our shortcomings and making a conscious effort to improve. This can only happen if we take the time to learn about one another, our own biases, and the consequences of our actions. The trainers took the lead in introducing themselves and outlining the session's structure. It was clearly not going to. What seemed like a one-time lecture turned out to be a series of workshops with the same goal: to foster an inclusive workplace. In the first session, participants would learn about unconscious bias and how it manifests in everyday life. The trainer, a composed man, began by sharing a personal story about his encounters with prejudice. The atmosphere in the room began to settle in, and the employees' attention grew. He then asked the group, "Have you ever made an assumption about someone that turned out to be wrong? How did that assumption affect your actions?" Lisa spoke up after a moment of silence, saying, "I have. I made assumptions about clients based on their appearance or speech, and I may have treated them differently as a result. I'm ashamed of this." Her candor appeared to spark a chain reaction, and other staff started opening up, some reluctantly and others with more confidence. Surprisingly, a middle-aged cashier confessed to unknowingly being less friendly to customers who don't speak English. A younger employee opened up about feeling ignored by upper management due to his age. Caroline listened intently, hoping for these candid discussions that could lead to then Derek, a previous ally of Neil's and a security guard, spoke out. He said, "I thought Neil was just doing his job." But after hearing everything, he wondered whether there was another way to approach the situation. Regardless, it's tough when I want to stress that this isn't about criticizing instincts. Rather, it's about learning to analyze them and act with purpose rather than reacting impulsively. Caroline nodded her head in agreement, her face reflecting her comprehension. "Derek, I appreciate you sharing that." As individuals left the room, a sense of relief washed over everyone, but a pervasive air of uncertainty lingered. Near the exit, Lisa reconnected with Derek and complimented him, saying, "That was really thoughtful of you." Well, maybe Neil wasn't quite correct, but that doesn't mean I'm entirely wrong either. Lisa offered him a half-smile, and Derek shrugged uncomfortably. "Nobody's saying you're absolutely incorrect, but it's a start." Meanwhile, Caroline observed the staff. As she stepped out of the session, a glimmer of hope returned to her. The session may not have fixed all the problems, but it had planted the seeds. Now she and her team needed to make sure those seeds developed into something tangible and long-lasting. Later that afternoon, Caroline had a meeting with Around the Table. Her senior leadership team discussed the first workshop's feedback and planned the next steps. Robert, an employee for over a decade, leaned forward with a clipboard, and the session appeared to go well. Expressions varied from cautious optimism to outright skepticism. Robert started by saying that workers were more forthcoming than I had anticipated, but that there is still a lot of reluctance, and that some people don't believe this will result in actual change. Caroline agreed and said, "That's understandable, but words only go so far. What matters is the follow-through." A younger manager named Priya entered the conversation. "I think it's great that people are being honest, but we also need to address the concerns that some employees have, like the idea that this could lead to a witch hunt where everyone's mistakes are magnified." Caroline seemed to be avoiding the issue by folding her hands, but I think it's important to stress that this initiative isn't about punishment, but about growth. I don't want to bring anybody negative attention, but we need to create an environment where things like this never happen. Robert shuffled uneasily in his chair. "One thing we still haven't covered thoroughly is the public impression problem. The statement we issued was Caroline let out a heavy breath as she felt the strain of the situation. "You're right. The public needs to see that we're serious about this, but I'm not in the mood to rush out superficial solutions. However, we're off to a good start, and the media is still covering the story. We need substance to satisfy the news cycle." So Priya paused before speaking again. "Have Alicia and Marcus consented to collaborate? Carolyn GL, would it be possible to include their voices to indicate that we're taking this seriously?" Robert sat back in his chair, his brow wrinkled as he said, "If they agree, what's the plan?" Alicia, understandably, wants to see real results before committing completely. The group grew quiet as Caroline tapped her pen on the folder. "I want them to co-lead a panel discussion with some of our staff. We need actual tales and experiences from both sides. It will be difficult, but that's the goal. We don't have time to second-guess boldness. Every day we delay is another day we fail our staff and consumers." Robert nodded slowly. "It's bold. It might work." Caroline rose to mark the conclusion of the conference. "Let's get started that evening. Marcus and Alicia, Whiled away in their living room, Marcus scowled as he placed down his laptop and said, "She's asking a lot. Sharing our story in front of their employees is very personal." Alicia stole a quick look at him, her expression betraying her disapproval. "Thoughtful," she conceded, "but surely the idea is that we must make it personal if we want people to comprehend." Marcus slumped, arms crossed, and Alicia extended her hand to grasp his. "But what if it backfires? What if they misinterpret our words, or it becomes a publicity stunt? If we remain silent, others will face the same challenges we did, and they may not be able to advocate for change," Marcus said, his resistance beginning to fade as he spoke with a hint of a smile. "It's not guilt," Alicia responded, gently pinching his. With a tiny giggle, Alicia pushed respond on the email. A renewed feeling of purpose came over them both. This wasn't just about making things right for Marcus. Alicia threatened to walk out if the transaction turned into a circus. The day of the panel discussion came swiftly. The store's conference hall had been transformed into an appealing but professional place with rows of chairs neatly organized. The participants were focused on creating a future in which incidents similar to theirs would not occur again. The event was being recorded for internal use, as indicated by the discreetly placed cameras at the back and the stage at the front. The employees entered the room with a mixture of curiosity and anxiety, whispering to each other as they took their seats. Caroline stood near the stage and calmly briefed Alicia and Marcus, who were both nervous and intrigued. Alicia remained poised and listened intently as Caroline detailed the discussion's progression, emphasizing that this isn't about assigning blame. Despite Marcus's crossed arms, the women exuded their typical grace. Marcus arched an eyebrow. "You're asking us to baring our souls in front of your staff, an unpleasant prospect, just so we may build understanding and share experiences. We'll leave the floor open for inquiries, but you're under no need to answer anything that makes you uncomfortable." Caroline entered the stage to begin the panel discussion, explaining its objective to shine light on how prejudice manifests. She flashed a subtle grin and said, "I won't pretend it's easy, but I believe this is how real change starts." As the workers settled in, Caroline continued, "I implore you to listen with receptive hearts and minds," as Alicia leaned into the microphone first, and Marcus Carter followed suit. "Today, we are honored to hear their story, which they describe as a gift, and the impact it has on customers, employees, and the company overall." As she described the events at the store, she described how Neil's actions made them feel humiliated, but her voice was calm and strong nonetheless. "What happened to us that night wasn't new," she said. "It was just one of many times when people judged us based on assumptions rather than our actual identities. The most difficult aspect wasn't being asked to leave, but rather the message behind it. You don't belong here. We've heard that message too many times in too many places." Marcus's tone was more consistent with his words, but her emotions were still evident. "I won't try to gloss over the fact that it was really frustrating. We in as paying customers, but emerged as suspects. This is indicative of a deeper problem than poor customer service." The room fell quiet as the impact of their remarks hit home. After Alicia and Marcus presented their tale, Caroline urged the staff to ask questions or share their own experiences. Some nodded in hushed agreement, while others looked around to see how their co-workers were responding. Initially, the room seemed uncomfortable. Her voice came up gradually as she said, "Listening to your story made me realize how much I've overlooked in my own actions. I've caught myself making snap judgments, and honestly, it's something I need to work on." A moment of silence followed as Lisa reluctantly raised her hand to express her gratitude. As she continued to work on her honesty, other employees started to speak up. A cashier, for example, told the story of feeling excluded from her co-workers due to her accent. A stockroom worker confessed to making jokes about stereotypes without realizing the harm they could cause. Derek Neal's ex-ally even stood up and said Alicia told Derek, "That's where change happens." After hearing this, I understand how easy it is to judge someone without giving them a chance. Marcus and Alicia listened carefully, replying with understanding and support. Just as the session was about to conclude, Caroline picked up the microphone again, but this wasn't the last word. With a forceful voice, she said that our organization was entering a new chapter, one in which we would all be held responsible, learn from one another, and pledge to do better. The crowd went wild with applause, as Alicia and Marcus were lauded for their bravery and the honesty that permeated the space. Marcus leaned over to Alicia and whispered, "Maybe this won't be a circus." The staff filtered out, and suddenly the room seemed lighter, as if a barrier had been breached. Caroline stood with Alicia and Marcus near the stage, and "I'm very grateful." Alicia smiled, "But there's still work to be done." With a nod, Alicia remarked, "Change takes time, but this is a start." As Caroline watched them go, she felt a combination of relief and resolve. "What you shared today will stay with them and with me," she said honestly. As the sun went down, Alicia and Marcus headed home, where the day's events hung heavy. Marcus dropped his keys on the counter, slumped into the sofa, and let out a deep sigh. Alicia poured 2 glasses of wine and joined him. When he lowered himself into the cushion next to him, taking a sip of his wine, Marcus said, "Do you think they got it?" Alicia cocked her head back, gazing at the sky. "I believe some of them." Marcus nodded slowly, taking a drink, and she said, "It's just hard, putting yourself out there." She continued, "They got it, Lisa, Derek, and even a few of the others. It's not about them understanding us, Marcus. It's about them understanding themselves. It's worth it if, after dealing with this for years, someone else finally figures out how to treat others with respect and dignity," Alicia replied with conviction as she faced him directly in the eyes. Alicia's phone started vibrating on the coffee table, interrupting her moment of peace. Marcus didn't answer immediately, but a trace of a grin pulled at the corner of his lips. "You always find a way to make me believe," he whispered. "I didn't want to bother you this late, but I thought you'd want to know that we've already started receiving feedback." Caroline sounded surprisingly energetic as she showed Marcus the screen and said, "Hello, Caroline. Received feedback from employees regarding the panel, and the majority of them found it enlightening." Alicia's lips slightly curled into a smile, indicating her happiness at the news. Caroline added, "It's more than that. It's a foundation." I must admit, I'm not naive enough to believe her, thinking that one session would solve everything, but it's a beginning. I want to express my gratitude once again for your candor and for entrusting us with your experience. We are closely monitoring Caroline. Alicia said that her tone is tough but not harsh, and if we see genuine improvement, we will remain engaged. As the conversation finished, Alicia put down her phone and glanced at Marcus. "They're moving in the right direction," she remarked, adding, "but we'll keep them updated." Caroline assured her that this wasn't just a show. At the shop, Caroline sat in her office reviewing the criticism. Marcus smirked as he lifted his glass to keeping them honest. Alicia clinked her glass to his, and they both agreed that this mattered. Listening to OneNote's story made me realize I've been a part of the problem. I want to do better not only for my co-workers, but for our customers too. Employees' comments during the panel discussion ranged from gratitude for the conversation's openness to confessions of their own biases. She closed her laptop, aware that tomorrow would bring more challenges, but she was prepared to face them. Caroline leaned back in her chair, feeling a cautious sense of hope. The road ahead was long, but she finally felt like the company was heading in the right direction. The department store's new inclusivity training program was unveiled the following week. It all started with an all-staff meeting, presided over by Caroline and the diversity consultants. Management, sales associates, and security personnel from every department gathered in the auditorium for the first session. As Caroline took the stage, the air was thick with a mixture of excitement and doubt. With an authoritative yet personable demeanor, she greeted the audience and started by saying, "Thank you all for being here today. This marks the beginning of a new chapter for our company. This is not just another training session. It's a commitment to." Caroline paused to allow the words sink in before continuing. Everyone carries prejudices, some of which may not be deliberate, but still affect their perceptions. A slide with the words, "Bias is not always visible, but its impact always is," came on the screen behind her. Dr. Emily Harper, the main consultant, is a kind but determined lady. She seized the microphone to explain that the aim is not to point fingers, but to gain insight into our behavior patterns and break free from them. Next week, we will begin a series of exercises designed to help us become more self-aware of our unconscious biases. One of the exercises asked employees to anonymously answer questions about their assumptions, such as, have you ever judged someone based on their race? Have you ever judged someone before knowing their backstory? Similarly, have you ever thought someone didn't belong anywhere only because of their location? Staff members entered their responses using tablets, and the results were shown on a big screen in real time. As the group fell silent, it was clear that the findings were shocking. Almost 70% of the participants confessed to making snap judgments about customers based on their clothing, and 50% admitted to treating co-workers differently because of preconceived notions about their talents or origins. Once again, Caroline took the lead, her voice composed but determined. This isn't about assigning blame, but rather about being truthful with one another and with ourselves. These figures reveal that we have tasks to do, and I can assure you that we are capable of. The session progressed to group talks in which employees were invited to freely express their experiences. Some individuals acknowledged to unknowingly repeating harmful habits, while others talked about feeling excluded by co-workers. Raw and often awkward, but they signified a watershed moment in the culture of the organization. During one such conversation, Lisa found herself paired with Derek, who she asked with genuine curiosity, "How are you feeling about all this?" Derek hesitated before responding. "It's a lot to take in," he said. "I've been giving a lot of thought to what I said during the panel and how I used to blindly support my positions. I guess I didn't fully appreciate the damage that could have been caused by that attitude." Lisa nodded. "It's not easy to admit, but it's something I've been reflecting on as well. I believe we can all improve," Derek smiled slightly. "It's like beginning again, but maybe that's exactly what I need." Meanwhile, Robert was uncomfortable confronting his own job as a manager to a younger employee in a different breakout group. After 3 years at the firm, Maria finally spoke up. "I want to feel like I belong here." She said, "I've felt invisible most of the time. I work hard, but I've been overlooked for opportunities because I don't fit the image of leadership." After a moment of silence, Robert finally spoke up. "You're right, I've been so preoccupied with my own ideas of what good leadership should look like that I haven't been noticing the talent sitting right in front of me. That's on me." This realization hit him like a ton of bricks, and he thanked Maria for pointing it out. Caroline concluded the meeting by saying, "The challenge is change begins with each of us, but it doesn't end there. I encourage you all to take what you've learned today and apply it." The room felt different, and by the end of the session, the initial skepticism had softened and been replaced by a sense of shared accountability, not only at work, but in every part of your life. Let's set a good example, not a bad one. As workers left, they could feel a change in the air. For the first time, they realized these were more than just cosmetic changes. They were the start of really occurring. Caroline remained behind to see her team's dismantling of despite her exhaustion. She clung to the belief that the job she was doing was meaningful. Dedicated to completing the task in the weeks after the training adjustments started to ripple through the shop, workers who were formerly reclusive began to engage in more conversational behavior. Discussions on diversity and inclusion transitioned from the formal training session to more relaxed gatherings in the staff break area, where a few individuals even began to hold each other to their promises in real time. When Lisa overheard Megan, a junior cashier, one afternoon, while interacting with a client who had difficulty communicating due to language barriers, "I failed to grasp what you were," Megan said. That Lisa saw the customer's shoulders as she spoke, impatiently stoop, making their pain apparent as they moved forward. Lisa delicately put a hand on, before greeting the client with a friendly, "Let me assist you," Megan said, "on my shoulder." With a kind grin, she spoke with the consumer using basic words and gestures, confirmed their request, and made sure they departed. Content, Lisa went to Megan and said, "Hey, I hope you're doing well." Keep in mind that they are likely experiencing the same level of frustration as you are while communicating due to a language barrier. Megan was uncomfortable, but she was attempting to convey the value of patience, agreed, saying, "You're right." She then confessed, "I wasn't thinking." As workers became more aware of the consequences of their behavior, incidents like this became more frequent, and Carolyn saw that she approached the transition with a cautious optimism, aware that the true test would lie not only in the behavior of employees, but also in how consumers felt the effects of the adjustments personally. In order to evaluate her progress, Caroline put a program that encouraged consumer input by posting tablets at checkout lanes for shoppers to use in rating and commenting on their shopping experiences. The data came in gradually at first, but as more replies piled up, a clearer picture started to emerge. Drew Caroline's attention today. The employees looked sincere in their care. I saw an improvement in their interactions with all consumers, rather than just a select few. It was a pleasant surprise. I've been a customer for a long time, but this is the first time I've ever appreciated being a part of this, so please don't stop. The comments weren't mostly favorable, although some consumers voiced doubt about the modifications and even called them outright. "It's a marathon, not a sprint," Caroline told herself, and she seized the chance, even in the face of criticism. Team at a meeting, doubt is inevitable. Consistency will show. Alicia and Marcus continued to play the role of external while we were busy with this. As Caroline's advisors, they often met with her to assess her efforts' progress, provide insights, and on occasion, questioning her method at a discussion, Marcus voiced a worry. He said that you've made significant progress with your staff, but he raised concerns regarding your recruiting methods in the event that you're Caroline. If your leadership team doesn't represent your consumers' diversity, how can you possibly meet their needs? Agreed and began making notes. You're totally correct. We have begun analyzing our recruiting pipeline, but we still have a ways to going forward. I will make it a point to mentor people from underrepresented backgrounds and diversify our leadership team. Improvement. Alicia leaned in, her voice reassuring you of your progress so far. But make sure the community notices this as well, since it can't end with internal changes. Activities, events, sponsorships, and projects that you can get behind. Let your Caroline grinned, appreciative of their ongoing support, and said, "Acts speak louder than policies." Participation. I like your candor. You have kept us to our word from the beginning, and it is just what we need right now. Derek, who was once well known for his friendship with Neil and his unexpected transformation, He had become an odd champion for the reforms he offered to spearhead due to his callous approach toward these matters. Facilitated smaller group talks with younger staff members, one of whom shared his own story of overcoming prejudice and trying to unlearn them, was Derek's admission at the beginning of our session. I first believed it was all in an effort to save face for the firm, but looking back, I see how much I needed to learn. I've messed up, but I'm making an effort to fix them, to improve my performance. If someone could hear Lisa, who is seated at the rear of the room, couldn't help but grin. The Derek she'd known months before would never have said such words. Even the most adamant customers might eventually come around. As the shop went through its evolution, the alterations gradually, what started as a reaction to one event, was evolving into a more noticeable change in culture. But Caroline, Alicia, and the rest of the crew were aware that the trip was far from done. Genuine change would need persistence, endurance, and unwavering dedication on the part of the stores. A new, inclusive culture reached a turning point on a hectic Friday night. Shoppers flocked to the department, and personnel were pushed to their limits to keep everyone's flow under control. Among the throng was a distraught lady attempting to juggle her two little children. As she waded through the aisles, Lisa saw the lady trembling and rushed over to offer her a kind hi as she held her hands. "Is there anything I can do to assist you? Or could you perhaps ask me to get a cart for you?" The lady paused, her expression betraying her astonishment. "Oh my, I appreciate it. I didn't think anyone noticed Lisa," she added, her voice tinged with relief, brought a cart back and remained close by to provide a hand as required throughout. It was clear that the lady was grateful, and a customer who was close and saw the exchange thereafter posted remarks on the thanks to the store's new technology. "I saw exceptional service from employees today. It's evident that things are changing in another section of the shop when it comes to making someone feel welcome, Derek." Encountered another kind of examination when a grizzled but well-dressed old black guy approached the jewelry counter. Derek observed the man's sluggish gait as he tapped his cane on the shiny floor. Much like a few other people in the store, gazed at the guy for an instant before swiftly averting their eyes, their silent but undeniable opinions clearly visible, warmly asking, "How may I be of service to you?" Derek rose to his feet and replied, "Good evening, sir." Looking up, the man's pupils narrowed slightly, as if he were preparing for something. "Typical callousness, I was only observing," he said with caution relaxed. Derek grinned and gave the signal to go at your own pace. The man's rigid expression relaxed as he offered to let the customer try on his clothes. After a brief interval, he gestured towards a sleek silver watch, which Derek cautiously took while managing the conversation. As the guy examined the timepiece, Derek treated him with the same professionalism and politeness he would any client. Took care to treat him with respect, not as an object of curiosity, but as an important human being. After a brief discussion, as the guy prepared to go, he glanced across at Derek and grinned slightly. "Thank you," he said. "You treated me right." Superior than the majority, Derek nodded despite a knot in his throat. "After all, it is my please return at your convenience, sir." The guy then departed, leaving Lisa, who had been watching from a distance, approached Derek, and with a nod of approval she stated, "That was great. You've come a long way." "Just what I should have been doing the whole time." Derek shrugged with a trace of pride on his face. As Caroline perused the comments from customers over the last week, a grin began to form on her face. As she read word after word of comments that were kind and friendly, careful and thoughtful, were beginning to supplant the complaints that had previously dominated their evaluations, and even staff were participating via internal channels to express their appreciation for the change in culture and the ways in which it was enhancing their workplace. Carolina Line was particularly struck by a statement from a lower-level employee about Thank you for giving me a sense of purpose outside my career for the first time." Caroline, her pride evident in her swollen chest, closed her laptop, acknowledging the road that had brought her here was far from ended. Obstacles, opposition, and periods of uncertainty would persist. However, instances such as this served to remind for her the store's transformation into an environment where decency and respect were more than simply rules on the ideals were lived out on a daily basis, and the effects of change were rising to a climax that impacted every customer, and beyond a few months later, that the turnaround of the department store served as an example of how businesses should use setbacks as opportunities for growth. Important shifts, the formerly dispersed initiatives to promote diversity and hold individuals accountable, have coalesced into an environment where workers could take pride, and where Alicia and Marcus's clients could have faith, listen to Caroline provide a rundown of the efforts deployed while attending a store-hosted roundtable gathering. Workers and members of the community gathered to hear Caroline recount the events leading up to the tragedy. The company's new training programs, recruiting, pipeline diversification, and anonymity. Caroline acknowledged the need to improve her tone, which she described as earnest. But so far, our work demonstrates that change is achievable with significant effort and unwavering commitment. Summoned Alicia and Marcus to the podium, where Alicia stood tall and confident, despite the fact that we never intended to blame anybody or bring shame upon ourselves. She started. She looked at it, and we shared it because we thought it may start a discussion that this store, and others like it, needed to have. At Marcus, who gave her the go-ahead to keep going, we've made real headway, and I applaud Caroline and her team's honesty and hard work, but we're only at the beginning. Her remarks were met with a standing ovation as she spoke of the interminable path ahead. Marcus rose to his feet and leaned against her as the resounding applause reverberated throughout the auditorium. Smiling slightly into the microphone, "I must admit that this establishment's customer service is at long last." The crowd let out a raucous in delight as the tension, the excitement building up to a mutual feeling of satisfaction. On the big night, Caroline stood by the doors, seeing the last few staff, as the store's lights went off and the customers left. As he passed by her, Derek waved and said, "Good night, boss." A smile tugged at her as Derek and Caroline answered with a light-hearted but sincere good night. As they departed, she glanced over to see Lisa and a couple of other workers engaged in lively conversation. Their bond was palpable. Sincere, which was unusual for her prior to the alterations routing. Alicia and Marcus and his companions walked up to her, arms crossed, and said, "You've done well." Caroline Alicia assured her that we would be closely monitoring her. I would have been grateful for anything less, and I giggled gently as I did so. Caroline paused as they departed to consider how the road ahead hadn't been. Simple blunders were committed, opposition was faced, and not all changes were immediately embraced. Excitement, but seeing the new culture's evolution as it emerged in real time. Locking the doors behind her, she stepped out into the cool evening air, filled with a peaceful sense of accomplishment for overcoming every obstacle. Despite the fact that her trip was far from over, she finally felt change wasn't an endpoint, but a journey, and she was resolute in her determination to see it through. In order to maintain, if you found this tale entertaining, please like and share the video. Feel free to share your ideas in the comments section, and for more content like this, subscribe to the channel. Your support is much appreciated, greatly appreciates your time and attention.